So, I'm going to go over some things here. I don't have this cleaned 100% for final prep yet. But from the factory, and what the book calls for is they're wanting to align these holes in this bushing with the grease zerk here. This grease zerk is bored through clear to this hole, and then it will grease this ring. If for some reason the bushing does turn, it will grease this ring in here. But they're wanting it put in directly like this, and the issue with this setup is here's the old pin and bushing out of this bore. This pin is in the tractor. This will be inside of here, and then naturally you got your bushing in between. But what happened with this one is our hole was here. This bushing pivoted ever so slightly, and it was still getting grease because this original bore has a groove in it just like this. This was still getting grease. The issue is this axle is continuously pushing up on this pin. And unless you lift the tractor up, and the axle with the weight of the tires and everything naturally comes down when you lift the tractor up with a loader, if you have one. If you don't have one, you would have to jack the tractor up underneath the axle and put jack stands underneath the frame, and then let the jacks down to create this gap. That is the only way that the grease actually gets to this bottom side. Now, where I'm going to differ a little bit from the book and try it out due to the fact that this is our tractor and I can test on it, is I'm going to take this bushing, and let me show you this pin here quick. This is another thing. If you have a bushing failure, you need to replace your pins when you do so. This bushing was worn completely out, like so. This bushing was worn completely out, and this pin was eating into this, or wearing into this housing here. And you guys probably can't hear it, but that is very rough. It's very gritty. You can see where there's some galling inside the pin there. I don't know how well you guys can see that. But we're going to replace that with a new pin. Excuse me, this one's, like I say, I haven't prepped everything for final assembly yet, but what we're going to do here is we're going to take this and we're going to pivot this to the bottom. Now what that's going to do is that's going to get grease to the bottom side of this race, or excuse me, this bushing at all times. Instead of being like this, because if you notice, if you don't lift the tractor up off of this, you're never going to get grease down into these pores. So my theory is if we switch this to this direction, even if the tractor is still down, we're going to fill up these grooves with grease, and then as the tractor pivots, as this pivots in here, it's going to spread that grease back and forth over this entire wear surface, which is where it always wears out. The only reason that this wore out on the side is because this bushing turned like so. Now, another thing from the factory, these bushings are not Loctited in place. We are going to go through, oops, I dropped that. We are going to go through and put a bearing retaining compound on this before we drive it in there. We're also going to put it inside the sleeve here, drive that in there, and then pump this up full of grease while that bearing mount is still wet, and then wipe the excess out. the grease out, and we're also going to fill up all of these little pores with grease before we install this onto the tractor. That will ensure we've got good grease contact all over the place on this pin right from the get-go. If we were to install these new bushings and reuse our old pin, I don't even want to stick this on there, because all of these little galls on here would drag and scratch on our new pin, and that's going to create instant wear from the instant you start using this tractor, and that's going to cause a premature failure. So this is a very important thing to replace when doing your axle. You may, if you're out in the field, or if you're somebody that buys one of these axles or is trying to do this repair on your own, you may take a rag and wipe the grease off of this, if you have any on there. And when you wipe that grease off, you may not see these little marks, because that grease may fill in those marks. So that's a very important thing to replace, because, you know, nobody wants to have a premature failure. If, you know, these bushings are not that much. I want to say they're $60 a piece, maybe. I'd have to look at the ticket, but not worth not replacing when you got to pull the whole front axle to do it. So I'll get some more pictures here after this is cleaned up a little bit, and I've got the bushings installed. I'll show that, and I'll show you how the grease is going to work in greasing this before I put these bushings in. So stay tuned for that. So let's see how this theory works. You'll probably notice a different color grease. That's because I switched from my, I'm going to change out this grease strip too. That's because I changed from my normal multi-purpose grease to a poly grease in my guns. That's probably why you're going to see it changing color from the orange to the black or the dark gray. Now, this will give us a good coverage for the initial break-in or use of this bearing, this bushing, excuse me. Let me just clean off this pin here quick in the tank. Now we'll have a nice, and let's also not forget to lube up this surface right here, because this is also a thrust surface that also gets wear on it. Now that will give us a nice break-in. That is perfect. Going to use this time to do a shameless plug on the greasable kingpin upgrade. These are non-greasable from the factory. I haven't greased the bottom one here yet, but this gets the point across. Now we've got the axle back underneath the tractor, and everything is good to go. Hook up our steering lines, put our fenders and our tires back on, and she's ready to rock. Go back to stacking bales, feeding cows.